So let's get straight into this video. Now, in the previous video we showed you the bodywork on that rear quarter there, and I've now gone across the rest of the panels on the car, done all the bodywork in exactly the same way, panel by panel, and got all this car nailed off, ready for the next stage. Now, I did say that because there's quite a lot of breakthroughs on this, what we're going to do is give this a quick once over with the epoxy and then give it some high build. So we're going to go through the epoxy layer, the details about the epoxy, etc. Then the first coat of high build, and then we'll have a bit of a walk around of the car later on in the video. Now, you just noticed me there, I am wearing my air fed, so I've just got all that rigged up and set up, ready to go. I'm using the Welcome Slim Combat, so 1.9. It's a good gun, but I am struggling a little bit this at the moment for like primer and for epoxy. It just doesn't seem to quite pump it out the same that my 1.8 Segola did. So I'm finding that I'm having to turn the pressure up quite a bit and turn the fan a little bit tighter to sort of force it out that little bit better, because I don't really want to be over reducing it to get it out of the gun. Now, the epoxy, I have reduced this epoxy, so this is the multi-mix epoxy. I have reduced this a little bit because I don't want build on this coat. I literally want to put the epoxy now. As you can probably see by all them shiny spots, I want to seal the filler over. I want to seal all those bits of bare metal down where we've rubbed through, and then I want to go straight over this later on in the video with the high build. So I'm just after a really sort of smoothish thin layer, like literally just a quick once over, just to seal all the metal down and just protect everything, and give it a really good sort of protective layer before I start the primer over the top. I don't want to risk putting the primer over these bare metal areas, and I want to just give the metal that extra bit of rust protection. So this complete sealed layer now will just help give this car a little bit more of sort of longevity, I guess, especially on these minis. They've got quite a lot of common areas where they go, so pretty much all over. No, they have got quite a lot of common areas where they go, so I want to make sure that I'm not just putting primer over them areas, because obviously primer is porous. I want to put the epoxy down in one even, like, fully sealed coat over the car, and you can see I'm not going like I was last time. I'm not putting a ton of build on, it's just one quick coat. Now, I used around about, I think, 15% of reducer in this, just literally so I could get a nice thin wet layer over the car as a protective layer. Now, the Slim Combat, I am waiting actually on a bigger tip for this, that Welcome are going to send me out, which hopefully should improve things a bit as far as the high build and stuff goes. But I am finding, as you see there, I'm playing with the gun a lot to try and get the right sort of output on it. It's not something that I really had to do with my Segola, but you know, when you're using new guns, all the new guns have got different settings. Obviously every gun sprays different, so I'm finding I'm having to tweak around with things a little bit just to kind of fit into my groove with it. But I think that bigger tip, when that eventually turns up, will sort that out, and give me the kind of laydown that I want without having to add extra reducer to everything. So on the previous videos, the first one, obviously we epoxied the bare shell. We left it thick, so we could get a real good build coat. And then in the video after that, we went across the blocking and the filler work on one of the panels. Now, obviously I've continued that across the whole car now, so all the filler work's been done. And in the first video where we did do the bare metal on the shell, we didn't bare metal the door shuts because the door shuts were actually quite good. There wasn't too many issues in there that warranted sort of spending quite a bit of time bare metal in them, because although you'd think that it'd be quite fast to bare metal inside the door shuts, because they're only small, they're also quite fiddly, so it takes a lot of time with a drill and loads of different wire brush attachments to actually get around all them areas and getting all them little nooks and crannies to get everything out. So instead I went with a P80, and then I went around it with a 180 hand pad. Did any filler work along the sills and stuff, because this at some point has had sills put in it, but rather than cutting them out and putting them in, there's bits where it's been patched over the top and little bits and pieces like that. Now, as part of this job, we're not sort of getting paid to make this concourse, it's just a respray. The guy that owns this car wants to be able to use it, so although it's ended up a bare metal repaint because of the paint that was originally on it, you know, he's not looking for concourse. We're just looking for a nice, usable, everyday sort of look and paint job on this car. It'll probably be a little bit better than what he was expecting in the first place, because obviously with bare metal in it, it's left me a little bit of room to make it nicer, a lot easier, because I'm not working with all the old paint and all the old crap. We ripped everything off, so all the old filler was taken out, and everything was done, so I just had the bare shell to work with. But you can see as this epoxy is laying down that the panels now are nice and straight. There's not a massive amount of filler on it either for one of these. There's the majority of the panels were actually quite flat and quite smooth. As you can see around there, there's just one or two areas where there's a few dents. A lot of the filler, and it's more sort of fine filler that's been put on it as well in a lot of areas, has been in the common areas like these A-posts, and also, like I said, along them sills where there's been like a bit of, not dodgy welding, but not proper welding. The welding's sound, there's no issue with it. It's strong, it's sound, it's, you know, it's covering where it should, it's strong, there's not an issue with it. It's just, rather than chopping out and plating properly, the plates have been overlapped a little bit, so we just had to reshape in there a little bit just to even everything up and make it look right when you open the doors. And you'll notice on this, I am taking my time, I'm not rushing this. I'm making sure that I get all up inside and right underneath all these edges. I want that fully sealed coat before I progress onto the next stage. I don't want to be missing a little bit of bare metal anywhere and having obviously like the porous primer on it. I want to get this sealed up, and you can see on that quarter there, as I'm just coating that up with that coat, now it's nice and wet. You can see it's nice and wet, it's nice and flat, it's nice and smooth. There's no sort of issues anywhere. So that's the shell down. Now you can see on here we've metal pulled the boot quite a bit to get rid of them issues. We had to fill that right hand side quite a bit, because that was the area that in the second video you would have seen there was quite a lot of damage to that corner. So once it's been metal filled, we've just re-skimmed that corner just to make sure all the shape's perfectly back in it, and all, you know, the edges and the swages and everything are back as they should be. Now you'll notice that the bonnet has now appeared in the booth. So the bonnet is a brand new bonnet. It's a good panel, it's a heritage panel. It's not like one of the cheap crappy remake panels that there's so many of these days for these minis, because minis are so popular. This is one of the really good solid heritage panels. The fitment on it's really good. For a brand new panel, there's no issues with it. I have given it a sand down. I can't find any, you know, highs or lows or any problem areas in it. It is a decent panel, and you can tell the difference between these heritage panels and a stock cheap panel. These are a lot heavier, a lot stronger. They're made for a lot bigger gauge steel than like the cheaper panels are. Just overall a much better panel to be putting on your restoration job. Obviously they do cost you a little bit more, but what it costs you in the little bit extra for the panel is what you're not going to be paying a guy like me in a paint shop to put right on a cheaper panel. So the extra little bit of cost on a panel like that does outweigh the amount of time that you're going to be spending a body guy or a painter to put that panel right in order for it to fit your car. Now these two doors did need quite a bit of work. This one in particular looks like at some point both of these have been reskinned, and when they've been reskinned you can see where most of the filler is. It was along the bottom end where it's been reskinned, and they've just bent the bottom skin of the door in, and around that door handle again. Older panels, slightly thinner panels like this, they do flex quite a bit, and where that door's opening and shutting, then that's one of the common areas where it's going to flex and bend. So that's the first stage out of the way and all sorted. That's all looking good. Now what I did was I gave that a bake at 60 degrees for around about 40 minutes. The recommended is 45, but I only put a very, very thin layer on. I wasn't putting a full build on. Now, wet on wet is what we're doing now. Now, to explain the wet on wet method, it doesn't mean you put wet paint on top of wet paint. What the wet on wet method is that you're not sanding in between. So some people call it wet on wet or a non-sanding process. So the particular process for this would be to put your epoxy on. You'd bake it for 45 minutes. We'd then let it come down to room temperature. Once it's come down to room temperature, then as long as it's a compatible high build, so we've used a MEPA high build here. Now I did test this just to be 100% sure that this worked, and it did work. So your MEPA 4:1 will work with the multi-mix epoxy, that's not a problem. And then, you know, once it's come down to room temperature and it's had that bake, then you can use this straight over the top, because it's at the point where it's dried but it's not fully cured. So we don't want to be spraying, you know, this primer basically on top of wet epoxy. That won't work. Now you also can't spray the primer on top of a completely cured epoxy. Again, that won't work. You'd need to key it up. So we're at the stage where it's dry enough that it's not going to react and it's not going to cause problems, but it's still, you know, not cured enough that the primer will stick without having to actually etch or abrade the surface to get that mechanical bond. There's still enough sort of chemical bond left there that putting this on top now will give us that nice mechanical bond, and everything will be fine. And I have tested this car just to be on the safe side. When I'd done the primer stage, I gave this an hour bake at 60 degrees, let it cool down to room temperature again, and just tried a little crosshatch test on a small bit that was out of the way, which, for those of you who don't know what a crosshatch test is, it's just a little adhesion test for paint, and it passed that with flying colours, not an issue. And if it passes that, general rule of thumb is you will not have any issues whatsoever. Now, as I said, I'm using the MEPA 4:1 high build. Now I've left this neat. There's no reducer in this whatsoever. Now the only thing that I found, obviously, using this gun with using it neat, is I did have to have the pressure cranked right up, and I had to turn the fan in quite a bit. As you can see there, I was just doing a little test, and I'm going to have to go quite slow around the car to get that nice wet build. Again, as I said in the first sort of section on the epoxy with this, I am hoping to get the larger tip for this and give it a bit more of a test with the larger tip. I mean, it didn't, don't get me wrong, it didn't do bad with the MEPA high build. This was a brand new tin as well, so it was still quite liquidy compared to, say, you know, if you get a tin that's a slightly older batch or something like that. But it did, with a brand new tin and a nice fresh tin that was still nice and viscous and nice and liquid, then it did perform alright with this. The last primer that I had, the MEPA stuff that I put through this gun, I did have to get a little bit of reducer in it just to help it come out and help it flow a little bit. On this particular one, it did alright. Now, this lighter coloured primer, it wasn't planned, because I'd actually figured that I'd ran out of my normal MEPA primer, so I gave a mate of mine a ring, and it just happened that he's got a couple of kits on the shelf at his shop, so he dropped me one off to my house that night, so that I could whack this over the next day, because I got it all masked, and then realised that I'd run out of high build. Now the bonus was that it only got the lighter shade, but the lighter shade actually worked out really well, because as you can see here, I can really concentrate and make sure now that I don't miss any coverage on this first coat. So I'm not gonna miss covering any of this epoxy up, because we've got a real nice light shade going over this really nice coloured or dark shade of epoxy. So it gives me a good opportunity to make sure that I'm not missing anything, because again, if it was a dark grey, it could be quite easy to miss, say, under the gutters or underneath inside one of them window edges. It could be quite easy to miss catching one of them with a good coat of high build, and I want a good coat so, you know, I can block this car out again. My plan will be to block the high build out with probably a 240, give it a quick DA with a 400, and then go straight over with the gloss. So having that nice build everywhere, and knowing I've got the nice build everywhere, so knowing that on this first coat I've not missed any, so I've got, you know, as much coverage as possible, is obviously best for the job. So this lighter shade of high build worked out really well actually, and it's quite nice. It laid down quite nice as well, so it's nice and smooth. The car looked very straight once it was all wetted up, which again is nice. You know, it's always good that when you've done all that work and you put all that work into a car and you start covering it up with the epoxy and then the high build over the top like this, that you can really see all that hard work that's sort of paid off. Now, I've only left in one coat of this high build because I didn't want to drag it out for like hours and hours and hours as far as the video went, because I'm sure, you know, you guys know that the second coat of high build is just going to be exactly the same as the first. But we do have a little bit of a chat later on in the video about what we're going to do next, and also about a few other bits and pieces as well. Now, I want to say that like this video series has been doing really well so far. You guys seem to be really enjoying it, and enjoying sort of watching through the full process on this car. So I want to thank everybody who's watched this little series on this Mini so far, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the videos. And if you are enjoying the videos, please hit the subscribe button, give the video a like, maybe share it in some of the groups that you're in, especially if you're in the Mini groups. I'm sure some of the guys with Minis would love to see one of these being painted. So if you're in any of them groups, then do me a favour, just give it a little share, you know, show a bit of love to the channel and give this a little bit of share to the other guys that are about, who might be interested in watching this online. Now, I'm not sure how many of you guys will be on tonight, with it being New Year's Eve. I know the last one went up on Christmas Eve, and this one seems to be going up on New Year's Eve. But, I mean, it stops you guys that aren't going out, I suppose, getting bored, and it gives you something to sit at home and have a little watch to. If you're like me, and you're going to be spending New Year's Eve at home on the couch, then at least you've got a little bit of something to keep you entertained. So you'll see with this, I'm going over this first coat. I'm not doing the usual high build method of giving it a light coat and then, you know, really wet coats, because we've already got the epoxy there. It's already sealed all the panels up, so we don't need to worry about anything pulling back or sinking into bare fillet, because everything's already been sealed by our epoxy. So we can just go for two really nice full wet coats on this car. Now, if you've got, say, a lot more filler in the car, or there's been a lot more bodywork done to it, or you're not quite sure about your repairs, then maybe a third coat would be beneficial. I'm pretty confident that the repairs and everything on this are pretty bang on. I've gone over the whole car with a 180 to highlight the areas that needed the repair work. I've then done all the repairs, and then I've gone across the whole car with a 180 again, obviously to get rid of all the 80 marks from the repair work. So I'm pretty confident these panels are flat and smooth. So I don't really need a massive amount of build. I'm just going to give it a quick run over with the block with a 240, just to be 100% sure in my own mind. Again with guide coat, that it's nice and flat, and then go across it with the P400 on the D8 to prep it for the actual gloss itself. Now, the backs of the doors and stuff that I haven't done yet, I'll just wet on wet those before I actually put the colour down on the car. Again, they're not too bad, so I can just give them a DA off, wet on wet them, and then we'll shoot the gloss on the actual car itself. But that's probably going to be maybe an episode away before we start shooting colour down. It depends how the videos pan out, and it depends how obviously the job itself pans out. It's been a bit awkward filming, with it being like the Christmas New Year sort of time and week. It's not the easiest to get the sort of the footage that you want, because I'm rushing around trying to get stuff done at the moment. I only had Christmas Eve off, and I was back straight in on the Monday, working straight on this car again, so that I could try and get it boxed off and into final primer like it is now this week, ready for hopefully painting in the next sort of week or two once I've done the roof and a few little other bits that need addressing on the car. So as you guys have just seen, we've got the final coat of epoxy on. Then we've given that a bake for around about 40-45 minutes at 60 degrees. We let that cool down then to room temperature, and then we put two full coats of high build and left the high build neat, and put two really nice thick coats of high build over the top. So let's let me turn the screen around on the camera so I can see what I'm doing. So now, body wise, we're looking nice. Everything's looking nice and straight. We're all looking good. There's one or two tiny little pinholes in one or two little areas, which aren't going to be an issue, because we can just catch them with a tiny little bit of fine filler before we put the top coat on. But overall now the body is looking really nice. Obviously we smoothed out
any of the pitting around the window edges, all that, so that when the window seals go back on, they all seal nice as well. Quarters are really nice and straight. The door shuts, obviously didn't do them the first time, but we caught them with this process. They didn't need doing twice. They were pretty much all right anyway, but I just wanted to make sure that everything was sealed up and done properly. Tailgate now, as you can tell by the light there, is nice and flat. All the issues have been taken out of that. All the pitting around the holes, and obviously the big dents and stuff that were in that. We've metal pulled that and done all that. And basically repeated the process that we did in the last video across the whole car. Now, the bonnet, although this is a new bonnet, and it is a heritage bonnet, so it's a decent bonnet. It's not one of the cheap remake bonnets. I've epoxied and primed that as well. I'm just going to give it a quick block out just to make sure it's nice. It did look nice when I sanded it down, but I just wanted to make sure that that was done the same as the rest of the car. So it's got that nice epoxy barrier in there, which obviously is going to help towards rust prevention in the future, and also hopefully give a little bit of lifetime to the paint job. And then that's been primed. I've done the bottoms of both the doors where all the work's been done on them. We haven't done the backs yet. What I'll do with the backs is, and the actual door frames at the top, is wet prime them before we finish it, just before we actually put the top coat on. Now, as far as the job goes, the next part of the job is going to be to unmask the roof, get that roof repaired, get that into primer and get all that sorted, and then I'll paint that, and then we'll prep the body and paint the body. So in the next video, will probably be on this one when we're actually on the paint stage, because the roof's going to be quite a mission to repair, because like say the front edge pretty much from like there forward, so that section of the roof needs a good skim and a good block out to sort out the issues on there. And then we'll start off with the paint on the roof as the next video, and then we'll obviously go through the body prep and then the paint on the body, and then probably do a final video after that of the actual finished car, panelled back up. It won't be fully rebuilt because the customer himself will be rebuilding a lot of it, but we'll get it all repanelled, get everything that we've got back on it, so that you guys can take a bit of a look at the finished product. So that's been pretty much, I'd say, 3.5 days of body work and prep, and then obviously today, bit of remasking, like the door shuts, bits and pieces before we put this on. So we're about 3.5, 4 days on the actual body side, on the bodywork side of it, to get it now looking as it is. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's video, and I'll see you again next week for the next video. Bye for now.